Let's talk about channel migrants. Meeting yesterday between Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron. Bit of a bromance going on there. They did that whole handshake and then clapping each other on the shoulder, and everyone trying to be the dominant male in that moment. But they had talks about the migrant channel crossings, and we're told by Number 10 that a deal with France over small boat crossings are in the final stages. But what could it mean? Let's talk to Steve Crawshaw. He's Director of Policy and Advocacy at Freedom from Torture. Good morning to you, Steve.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. We don't know the details of what this deal would involve, but Rishi Sunak said following the meeting in Sharm that there was not one simple solution to tackling the number of people crossing the channel, but he wanted to work closely with European countries, and more details will come in coming weeks. There is some talk about immigration officers from Britain being on the French border, but I'm not entirely sure how that will make a difference, given most of these people probably wouldn't go through the legal route anyway. What are you hoping to hear?
Yes, so as you say, it does look as though that deal is upcoming, and as you also say, we don't know any of the details of it yet. I think that I'm glad that collaboration is happening between different European governments, because that's actually been failing throughout this. And you and I have discussed this before as well. I think many people misunderstand, not least because of the misleading narratives from the government. But all those other countries actually take far more, both in absolute and in relative terms, than we do. So it's not somehow that they are doing nothing and they're pushing everyone on to the UK. If anything, it's the opposite. But collaboration together is good. And you're absolutely right to say that smuggling gangs, those are the people, and that's not good if those are benefiting. And so what we've also discussed before, you and I, is that the government has failed completely, has refused to have the possibilities of safe routes, which would, of course, take the pressure off the.
But we wouldn't have safe. We've got 40% of the people who are coming over this year are Albanians, and there's a much higher percentage right now. Wasn't at the beginning of the year. They're not fleeing a war-torn country, economic migrants or involved in criminal intent. They're not going to have safe route. We're not going to offer a bunch of tens of thousands of Albanian men in their 20s a safe route to come and live and work in this country legally, are we? So or claim asylum here. So they're still going to be coming on those boats.
Right. At the moment, there's been a lot of Albanians, been a significant spike on that. And actually, even there, the majority of those are, in fact, found eligible for asylum. Some very significant, paradoxically, trafficking issues that are being dealt with there. But what overwhelmingly over the past 6 years, again and again and again, throughout that period, it's actually been Iranians, and that may well again be the case, Iranians who've topped the list. And of course, those people are absolutely fleeing terrible things, as we see on our television screens, as Freedom from Torture sees, in terms of the people coming through our doors who've suffered terrible torture, but others suffering the oppression in different ways. They've made a very dangerous overland journey, and then for various reasons, which most usually involve either a mixture of family or language knowledge or other things, then do come across the UK. But reminder that this is really the small minority. The overwhelming majority end up going elsewhere. Some end up coming to the UK, and we want to help that to have a proper process, not just throwing the doors open, which is sometimes, again, what the government likes to suggest, but going back to the basic principles of letting people arrive, which is how the Refugee Convention is set up. You arrive and then you ask the questions.
But this is the trouble.
Case, then it stops, and that's what's not happening. So collaboration in general is we're getting a lot fewer. I mean, we have a lot fewer than some other countries. That's because we're not on mainland Europe. We've got people have to get across the Channel, and they've got open borders. That's their choice. And Schengen, more for them, in my view. I'm not sure they chose to be a mainland, but
but they've chosen to have open borders with their neighbours and to be part of the EU and Schengen area. So that's a political choice they've made. So they have to deal with the consequences of that. We chose, even when in the EU, not to do that. But the crucial thing is that when we do actually have people who get here, the process is far too long. The Home Office is totally inept. I completely, everyone in the country can agree on that.
Indeed.
However, we do have a much higher rate at which we accept people from individual countries than do, say, Germany. We think of Germany as a country that opened its doors to 1 million Syrians in 2015, half of whom, by the way, turned out not to be Syrian. But while our acceptance rate is 2 or 3 times higher that of some of similar countries, which suggests that something else is going on. Now, are these people more desperate? I would doubt that. Or are we actually accepting too many people who don't really need to be here?
I think there's also a disconnect between what's said, what actually happened. So David Cameron, rightly in 2015, seeing the terrible things that were happening in Syria, set up a scheme to make it possible, make it much easier for Syrians to arrive in the UK.
But set a very low cap, which by the way, the British public agreed with.
That's also true. That's also true. But nonetheless, it was a good in principle of leaning in and saying you are suffering a lot and trying to help that. On Afghanistan, lots of promises were made which didn't happen. And you rightly address the backlog there. People think that the backlog must be, and it's a logical thing to instinctively think, look, backlog must be because the numbers have shot up. Actually, the numbers haven't shot up. What we've seen is a complete failure to deal with those numbers, to do with the process. And dealing doesn't mean just accepting. Dealing means listening. But again, as a reminder to all of us, although the government buries this again and again, when the government itself looks, then more than 3/4 of those are found. And those rules haven't really changed. It's not that we're being more generous.
But it's often it's interpretation of the rules. It's interpretation of the rules, isn't it? And it's how, like, our judges now interpret, for instance, human rights legislation after me. That there is a change in that. But we'll have to leave that.
Believe me, and any of my colleagues and those working with us and those who've been torture survivors coming through our door kind of would say the opposite. We at Freedom from Torture have documented this many times, that actually the disbelief that people face, even when telling their own terrible stories, it's incredible how difficult it is to get through the system. And people are kept in limbo for years.
Absolutely. Whatever the way the decision goes, it should be made more quickly. Steve Crawshaw, really appreciate you joining us. He's from Freedom from Torture.